Hi, welcome to Ikate's Crossing as we have a look at the 10th insight with the Shamanic Medicine cards. What card are we going to pull today in regards to the rest of this chapter? Vision Quest. Seek. Let's have a look and see what that card has to say. The time of abandoning, ignoring, diminishing, and misunderstanding the power of the old ways and wisdom is coming to an end for you. On the physical plane, you feel a need to carry on in your set ways a matter of survival. But this will soon create a state of emptiness, weakness, and fear. A rite of passage, like a vision quest, allows the body to respond to challenge and gives you the strength and vitality to deal with the changes. On a transpersonal level, you are seeking soul knowledge. You want to know who, what, and why you are, as well as the possibilities that lie before you. This knowledge, enriched by the wisdom of the collective unconscious, is the basis of your recognition of your physical or spiritual place on Grandmother Earth. A vision quest is a way of taking the first steps towards knowing your true place in nature. Quest what you seek, and you will return with healing and direction for yourself, your loved ones, and for all of us. Vision Quest revealed. Vision quests renew and revitalize the human spirit. The participant, usually alone in nature, engages in fasting and prayer to enter a trance state. They may encounter spirit guides, ancestors, or healing visions. Being alone in nature for days at a time is a powerful rite, but it is important to understand the process and know your responsibilities. Before undertaking a vision quest, examine your motives, take precautions, and be mindful of your physical safety. Other divinatory meanings include become your authentic self, get to know the truth of who you really are and what you are capable of. Don't measure yourself by the deeds and words of others. Your voice must be heard. Don't follow the crowd. You're entitled to your own preferences and opinions, and speak up. Vision Quest speaks. Become the quester of your vision. Where and how is your decision. Meet your guide with their protection. Heal your wounds and change direction. Okay, so let's continue this chapter of A History of Awakening. By the 19th century, we were on the verge of a second great transformation of human culture, a transformation that would be built on the new energy sources of oil and steam and finally electricity. The human economy had developed into a vast and complicated field of endeavor that supplied more products than ever before. Through an explosion of new techniques, in great number people were moving from rural communities to great urban centers of production, shifting from life on the farm to involvement in the new specialized industrial revolution. At the time, most believed that a democratically founded capitalism, unfettered by government regulation, was the desired method of human commerce. Yet again, as I picked up on individual birth visions, I could see that most people born into this period had come hoping to evolve capitalism towards a more perfect form. Unfortunately, the level of fear was such that all they managed to intuit was a desire to build individual security, to exploit other workers, and to maximize profits at every turn, often entering into collusive agreements with competitors and with governments. This was the great era of the robber barons and of secret banking and industrial cartels. However, by the early 20th century, because of the abuses of this freewheeling capitalism, two other economic systems were set to be offered as alternatives. Earlier in England, two men had posed an alternative manifesto which called for a new system run by workers that would eventually create an economic utopia where the resources of the whole of humanity would be made available to each person according to his needs without greed or competition. In the horrible working conditions of the day, the idea attracted many supporters, but I quickly saw that this materialistic workers' manifesto had been a corruption of the original intention. When the birth visions of the two men came into view, I realized that what they were intuiting was that human destiny was eventually to achieve such utopia. Unfortunately, they failed to remember that this utopia could only be accomplished through democratic participation, born of free will and slowly evolved. Consequently, the initiators of this communist system from the first revolution in Russia erroneously thought that this system could be created through force and dictatorship, an approach that failed miserably and cost millions of lives. In their impatience, the individuals involved had envisioned in a utopia that had created communism and decades of tragedy. The scene shifted to the other alternative to a democratic capitalism, the evil of fascism. This system was designed to enhance the profits and control of the ruling elite, who thought of themselves as privileged leaders of human society. They believed that only through the abandonment of democracy and the union of government with the new industrial leadership could a nation reach its greatest potential and position in the world. I saw clearly that in creating such a system, the participants were almost totally unconscious of their birth visions. They had come here wishing only to promote the idea that civilization was evolving towards perfectibility, and that a nation of people, totally unified in purpose and will, striving to attain their fullest potentials, could reach great heights of energy and effectiveness. What was created was a fearful, self-serving vision, wrongly claiming the superiority of certain races and nations, and the possibility of developing a supernation whose destiny was to rule the world. Again, the intuition that all humans were evolving towards perfection was distorted by weak, fearful men into the murderous reign of the Third Reich. I watched as others who had likewise envisioned the perfectibility of mankind, but who were in greater touch with the importance of an empowered democracy, intuited that they must stand up against both alternatives to a freely expressed economy. The first stand resulted in a bloody world war against the fascist distortion, one finally at extreme cost. The second resulted in a long and bitter Cold War against the communist bloc. I suddenly found myself focusing on the United States during the early years of this Cold War, the decade of the 50s. At this time, America stood successfully at the apex of what had been a 400-year preoccupation with secular materialism. Affluence and security had spread to include a large and growing middle class, and into this material success was born an enormous new generation, a generation whose intuition would help lead humanity towards a third great transformation. This generation grew up constantly reminded that they lived in the greatest country in the world, the land of the free, with liberty and justice for all its citizens. Yet, as they matured, members of this generation found a disturbing disparity between this popular American self-image and actual reality. They found that many people in this land, women and certain racial minorities, were by law and custom definitely not free. By the 60s, the new generation was expecting closely, and many were finding other disturbing aspects of the United States self-image. For instance, a blind patriotism that expected young people to go into a foreign land to fight a political war that had no clearly expressed purpose and no prospect of victory. Just as disturbing was the culture spiritual practice, the materialism of the previous 400 years had pushed the mystery of life and death far into the background. Many found the churches and synagogues full of pompous and meaningless ritual. Attendance seemed more social than spiritual, and the members too restricted by a sense of how they might be perceived and judged by their onlooking peers. As the vision progressed, I could tell that the new generation's tendency to analyze and judge arose from the deep-seated intuition that there was more to life than the old material reality took into account. The new generation sensed new spiritual meaning just beyond the horizon. They began to explore other lesser-known religions and spiritual points of view. For the first time, the Eastern religions were understood in great numbers, serving to validate the mass intuition that spiritual perception was an inner experience, a shift in awareness that changed forever one's sense of identity and purpose. Similarly, the Jewish Kabbalist writings and the Western Christian mystics, such as Mr. Eckhart and Teilhard de Chardin, provided other intriguing descriptions of a deeper spirituality. At the same time, information was surfacing from the human sciences, sociology, psychiatry, psychology, and anthropology, as well as from modern physics, that cast new light on the nature of human consciousness and creativity. This accumulation of thought, together with the perspective provided by the East, gradually began to crystallize into what was later called the human potential movement. The emerging belief that human beings were presently actualizing only a small portion of their vast physical, psychological, and spiritual potential. I watched as over the course of several decades the information and the spiritual experience it spawned grew into a critical mass of awareness, a leap in consciousness from which we began to formulate a new view of what living a human life was all about, including ultimately an actual remembrance of the 9 insights. Yet, even as this new view was crystallizing, surging through the human world as a contagion of consciousness, many others in the new generation began to pull back. Suddenly alarmed at the growing instability in culture which seemed to correspond to the arrival of the new paradigm. For hundreds of years, the solid agreements of the old world view had maintained a well-defined, even rigid order for human life. All roles were clearly defined, and everyone knew his place. For instance, men at work, women and children at home, nuclear and genetic families intact, a ubiquitous work ethic. Citizens were expected to discover a place in the economy, to find meaning in family and children, and to know that the purpose of life was to live well and create a more materially secure world for the succeeding generation. Then came the 60s wave of questioning and analysis and criticism, and the unwavering rules began to crumble. No longer was behavior effectively governed by powerful agreements. Everyone now seemed empowered, liberated, free to chart his or her own course in life, to reach out for this nebulous idea of potential. In this climate, what others thought ceased to be the real determinant of our action and conduct. Increasingly, our behavior was being determined by how we felt inside, by our own inner ethics. For those who had truly adopted a more lived spiritual point of view, characterized by honesty and love towards others, ethical behavior was not a problem. But of concern were those who had lost the outer guidelines for living, without yet forming a strong inner code. Yes, they seemed to be falling into a cultural no man's land, where now anything seemed to be permissible. Crime and drugs and addictive impulses of all kinds, not to mention a loss of the work ethic. To make matters worse, many seemed to be using the new findings of the human potential movement to imply that criminals and deviants weren't really even responsible for their own actions, but were instead victims of an oppressive culture that shamelessly allowed the social conditions that shaped this behavior. As I continued to watch, I understood what I was seeing. A polarization of viewpoint was quickly forming around the planet, as those who were undecided now reacted against a cultural viewpoint they saw leading to runaway chaos and uncertainty, perhaps even to the total disintegration of their way of life. In the United States, especially, a growing number of people were becoming convinced that they were now facing what amounted to a life and death struggle against the permissiveness and liberalism of the past 25 years, a cultural war, as they called it, with nothing short of survival of wisdom, civilization at stake. I could see that many of them even considered the cause already near lost, and thus advocated extreme actions. In the face of this backlash, I could see the advocates of human potential moving into fear and defensiveness themselves, sensing that many hard-earned victories for individuals' rights and social compassion were now in danger of being swept away by a tide of conservatism. Many considered this reaction against liberation an attack by the embattled forces of greed and exploitation, who were pushing forth in one last attempt to dominate the weaker members of society. Here I could clearly see what was intensifying the polarization. Each side was thinking the other to be a conspiracy of evil. The advocates of the old world view were no longer considering the human potentialists as misguided or naive, but were in fact considering them to be part of a large conspiracy of big government socialites, holding adherents of the communist solution who were seeking to accomplish exactly what was occurring in the erosion of cultural life, to the point where an all-powerful government would come in and straighten everything out. In their view, this conspiracy was using fear of increasing crimes as an excuse to register guns and systematically disarm the public, giving even greater control to a centralized bureaucracy that would finally monitor the movement of cash and credit cards through uplinks into the internet, rationalizing the growing control of the electronic economy as crime prevention or as a necessity to collect taxes or prevent sabotage. Finally, perhaps under the ploy of an impending natural disaster, Big Brother would step forward and confiscate wealth and declare martial law. For the advocates of liberation and change, the opposite scenario seemed more likely. In the face of the Conservatives' political gains, all they had worked for seemed to be crashing before their eyes. They too observed the increasing violent crimes against the degenerating family structures. Only for them the cause was not too much government intervention, but too little too late. In every nation, capitalism had failed a whole class of people, and the reason was clear. For poor people, there existed no opportunity to participate in the system. Effective education wasn't there, the jobs weren't there, and instead of helping, the government seemed ready to back away, throwing out the anti-poverty programs with all the other hard-won social gains of the last 25 years. I could see clearly that in their growing disillusionment, the reformers were beginning to believe the worst, that the rightward swing in human society could only be the result of increased manipulation and control by the moneyed corporate interests in the world. These interests seem to be buying government, buying the media, and ultimately, as in Nazi Germany, they would slowly divide the world into the haves and the have-nots, with the largest, richest corporations running the small entrepreneurs out of business and controlling more and more of the wealth. Sure, there would be riots, but that would just play into the hands of the elite as they strengthen their police control. My awareness suddenly jumped to a high level, and I finally understood the polarization of fear completely. Great numbers of people seemed to be gravitating to one perspective or the other, with both sides raising the stakes to that of war, of good versus evil, and both visualizing the other as the perpetrators of a grand conspiracy. And in the background, I now understood the growing influence of these people who claimed to be able to explain this emergent evil. These were the end times analysts to whom Joel had referred earlier. In the growing turmoil of the transition, these interpreters were beginning to increase the power. In their view, the Bible prophecies were to be understood literally, and what they saw in the uncertainty of our time was the long-awaited apocalypse preparing to descend. Soon would come the outright holy war in which humans would be divided between the forces of darkness and armies of light. They envisioned this war as a real physical conflict, fast and bloody, and for those who knew it was coming, only one decision was important: be on the correct side when the fighting began. Yet simultaneously, just as with the other landmark turns in human history, I could see beyond the fear and retrenchment to the actual birth visions of those involved. Clearly, everyone on both sides of the polarization had come into the physical dimension, intending that this polarization would not be so intense. We wanted a smooth transition from the old materialistic worldview to the new spiritual one, and we wanted a transformation in which the best of the older traditions would be recognized and integrated into the new world that was emerging. I could clearly see that this growing belligerence was an aberration coming not from intention, but from the fear. Our original vision was that the ethics of human society would be maintained at the same time, that each person could be fully liberated and the environment protected, and that economic creativity would be at once conserved and transformed by introducing an overriding spiritual purpose, and further that this spiritual purpose could descend fully into the world and initiate a utopia in a way that symbolically fulfilled the end-time scriptures. My awareness amplified even further, and just as when I had watched Maya's birth vision, I could almost glimpse this higher spiritual understanding, the full picture of where human history was intended to go from here. How we could achieve this reconciliation of views and go on to fulfill our human destiny. Then, as before, my head began to spin and I lost concentration. I couldn't reach the level of energy needed to grasp it. The vision began to disappear and I strained to hold on, seeing the current situation one last time. Clearly, without the mediating influence of world vision, the polarization of fear would continue to accelerate. I could see the two sides hardening their feelings, intensifying as both began to think the other to be not just wrong, but hideous, venal, in league with the devil himself. Okay, that's it for me for today. Don't forget, check the links down below, check the links on my channel, like, subscribe, and ring the bell so you know when the next video will be uploaded. Take care. Blessed be.